come from a family of artists on the female side of several generations and business executives. My dad was an inventor as well as a business executive, and I admired him greatly and wanted to be very much like him, but I ended up being an artist anyway. I was told by a family friend, and I'm not sure she meant it in a complimentary way, that I had the artist personality when I was very young. So I think it was an inevitable slide into it. Went to college. I went to Kent State and was there during the shootings and dropped out after. And then I went to University of Michigan, where I actually did graduate in psychology. Then I was at loose ends and decided to go to an art center that I'd gone to as a high schooler with my mother. And I had the most fabulous teachers. They were top in the world. And those people were very inspiring, and they became my family. And I just became interested in a variety of fields, including printmaking, enameling, and painting. The reason I chose enameling was when I was in 5th grade, the school I went to had movies on Fridays. And they had a movie of a man doing enameling. And it was this immense piece of copper that was probably 12 or 15 feet wide and about maybe 4 or 5 feet deep. And he took enamel in handfuls, and you know, the stuff's terribly expensive, and just flung them onto it and then would fire it by moving the series of jets from one pipe. And I thought, I want to do that. My kill is 14 by 14 by 14. So it will be heavy, and you have to have special tongs to put it in that allow for a tremendous amount of weight, because each time you layer the glass, it's another layer of weight, and then you have the back as well, which you must do at equal depth and thickness. But that I will be able to do 12 by 12 inch pieces. Now those particular ones, which I believe may be visible behind us, they're a reference to a famous French painting, and it's called Afternoon in the Park, only it's set in French. And it's about, you see a river in the background with women bathing, and then there's a forest, and there are men, and they're wearing dark suits and white shirts and ties, I think. And then there's one woman sitting with them, talking with them, and she's totally starkers. And it was a big shocker painting at its time, and they refused to show it in the place where you showed paintings. That was the top place in Paris. And so those 3 enamels are a reference to that piece, those 3 nudes that are behind us. Well, space kind of goes with night, and I'm a great lover of night. Although I live in the city of Oakland, I live in the forested hills. And if you can walk where it's actually close to full dark. Space is a form of night, and I see night as part of day. I see the 24-hour cycle. I don't split it off into light and dark as much as many people do. Now, in regards to the jazz series, I was given some metal that is on the bottom of each one of those. And I love certain forms of jazz. They allow the mind to wander and to think about things in addition to what you're hearing. It seems to trigger thoughts, and I like to think a lot. I have wheels inside the noggin, and so I chose quotes that are about the creative process from a variety of jazz musicians. So that's what those are about. When I was young, wanted to be a printmaker, and it took me a long time to realize that my forte in art is color. And enameling has very gorgeous colors. They're seductive. Enameling started, some say, all the way back into Egypt with a very famous mask. But and there are arguments on whether you count that as not. But it's certainly the colors are established as a substitute for jewels. So they are jewel-like. They're opaque and transparent ones. And depending on how long you fire them and how often, they become increasingly more brilliant. And so they mature in the process. So enamels are attractive to me, but I'm basically known, my reputation is in painting. And I'm known for my paintings. I'm collected by various venues and museums. And so enameling was a hobby, even though I had that serious urge. So enameling is like some forms of art for artists, where you start as, you're just interested in it. It just looks appealing. You might want to explore and check things out and see how different medias work different ways. And then you're sort of almost drawn into it inevitably. And then you find that you really want to do it. And then if you're a serious artist, as I am, you're not happy unless you're doing it. That's the mark of a serious artist. So the enameling became more and more serious as I had more and more opportunity to do it. Enameling is technically difficult. It requires a lot of anticipating what something will be, and each time you fire it, it mutates, and different colors mutate at different rates. And so, since it's many firings, you put the item in the kiln, and you fire it for 3 minutes, and it goes to cherry red. It's that hot. And then you bring it out, and you have ways to put it in the kiln so it trivets and things like that. So each time you bring it out, you can watch it change colors back to what it is, and that's fascinating. But there's the oops factor in that, oh, you forgot, and you were doing something else with another piece of enamel at the sink, and all of a sudden you realize it's been in for 10 minutes, and it's burnt. And then you go back and you go, I wonder what would happen if I do this. After all, it's already ruined, and you can continue on. For example, I have one piece in this show called the Velveteen Cat, which is a figure that everyone loves, or at least a lot of children do. And it's a cat made with an outline of wire. And I was over at the sink grinding down with a stone, grinding down some enamels, and I just forgot that 3 minutes went on, and I burned it pretty thoroughly. The colors actually bubble up and separate like oil and water. And I just added more color and overfired it some more, and I really like it, so I put it in this show.
I've always had a sort of innate knack for working in 3D rather than 2D. So at some point I was in an art store and I saw something called copper impression mesh. And I picked it up and I said, oh, this is interesting, maybe I'll try enameling on it. And it sat in my studio for years. Just sat there, and one day again I walked by and I went, oh, I should do something with that. The mesh, it looks like screening, but I think when they say impression, it's not woven in and out like this. It is a solid piece of metal that's very thin that looks like wire. But you know, most screening is like this. It's 2 pieces of wire interwoven. But this is, I think they take a big mill and press it down. So it's all one piece, and you can pull it and stretch it. I've tried regular screening, and it doesn't work very well because it doesn't stretch very well. So what you can do with it in terms of curves and making flat areas is very, very limited because it's so stiff and inflexible. Whereas the copper impression mesh, you can work pretty well. It does keep getting thinner and thinner. You have to be very careful that you don't break it, although you can break it and involve the breakage into your art piece, which has worked very well a couple of times. I learned that I needed to anneal the screen, which means I don't know how much people know about annealing, but you heat it up, cool it down, and it makes it less stiff. You mix up the molecules in the metal. And then as I form the pieces, those molecules get stiff again. They all realign themselves and the wire re-stiffens. And I had a lot of difficulty with firing the pieces because Most people use a trivet to fire on, but the trivets make marks on your fired piece, and the copper mesh itself is so thin that it's very difficult to get rid of those little marks on your pieces. So I finally started using wires around the edges of the copper mesh for two reasons. One was to stabilize the shape and make it a little bit more cohesive. It also helped in the kiln because when you put something like this delicate in a kiln, if you leave it in there sometimes more than 30 seconds, it starts to deform because, yeah, it just collapses. So, but the wire, when you look at the pieces, they're all smooth and worked into the piece, but when I'm firing them, they're these long things that I can take and hang on a form that I had specifically made to fire these pieces. There's one piece in the show, it's called Entwined One. It's basically a multimedia piece because it also includes a root that I found on my property, and I do that a lot. I like to mix things up, but when I'm using wood or roots or stuff like that, I usually go and I smooth it and form it a little bit more to fit the piece that I've made. So this particular piece, when you look at it, the wires have been used to attach it to this root. But originally, they were all sticking up in the air and all real squiggly and squirrely, and it was, I depend them, I hang them from this trivet thing that I have. So they're totally free. And the firing is very delicate in terms of timing. I have to be really on top of it. And I normally fire about 14 to 1500. And there's always a final firing that can include maybe a top layer of iridescence that you can use on top. And they kind of glow a little bit back at you. It's mica is what it is. So I'll add that at the last firing. The last firing, what I'm attempting is to smooth out the enamel as much as possible, to thin it out as much as possible without having it fall off the piece, because that's always a problem. And when I do the final firing, if I can reach that point of firing, it becomes very translucent, and that's what I'm going for. The origami idea, again, grew out of just experimenting around and looking at this copper mesh and looking at it one day and go, you know, this is a little bit like paper. I wonder if I could fold it. So I got into an origami period. I did fool around with just paper to practice for quite a while. And then I discovered something called unit origami, which, if you've seen it, what you ordinarily see will be symmetrical balls of origami paper. And they're very, well, it's a ball or a square, and it's very symmetrical. Well, I've never been much into symmetry. So I began taking the copper mesh and folding it. And I had to figure out what to leave. Because you're folding the mesh and it's thicker than paper, I had to learn what I could cut away and have it still be stable. So I learned all that, and what you get when you do unit origami is you get pockets and you get tabs, and the tabs fit into the pockets. So that was great. I got everything put together, and then I started to fire them, and they are so transitory. I mean, the pockets and the tabs, yeah, you've got a connection, but under heat, they want to let go. So I had an electric forming tank, and I thought maybe I can strengthen these by electroforming them. Now, electroforming is just the process of laying extra metal on top of what you already have. It's like plating, essentially. Like a 14K plated jewelry is the same thing. You're just using gold. Electroforming usually means you're using copper, which is obviously what I use because you're not going to put 24 karat gold on these things. That would be a lot of money. And you need a very, very large bath. So again, I suspended these things down into the electroforming bath and check them periodically. It takes several days to get enough on there, enough extra copper on there to stabilize them. And I did that. I tried to stabilize them. I also tried using copper tabs, but I found in the long run what worked best was actually using rivets through some of the areas to really solidify the piece. So almost all of the origami pieces have rivets run through where the pockets and the tabs go together, and that stabilized it. When I got to that point, I knew I could fire them successfully. And then I went on from there, like the bird and Atlantis, both went back into the electroforming bath after I enameled them, and that's why they have that blue on there. That turned the copper blue. So that was an extra step. I did it a couple times, and I felt like, okay, that's pretty cool, but I'm done with that. I need to move on from there. And I started getting larger and larger. Some of them also have, instead of the mesh, they have very thin copper in them. If you look at them, you'll see that there's actually areas that are just flat, and that's the copper itself. It comes very thin. And so I did that for a while. And then I wanted to get a little bit more involved with the imagery on the pieces. And I started, after they went through all the initial steps and they got a coat of enamel on them, a pretty solid coat of usually white. I frequently put a different color on the inside, so when you look in, you'll see that it's different. I went to doing acid etching on the glass and adding Prismacolor. And the one that is like that is the Rose of Life. That has a Prismacolor layer on it. And I was a little worried about how well it was going to work. It seems very stable. Nothing's come off. I'm not too worried about it anymore. And you can continue to add more Prismacolor, some of it's ink as well as Prismacolor. It's like India ink, by using a varnish in between. So they couldn't go back into the kiln. It would completely burn off and turn black.
This show has 3 artists in it, and one of them is my friend Alana Clearlake, whom I've done various projects with over the years, and whose work I greatly admire. And the other one is Sarah Gordon. And Sarah Gordon was a former apprentice of mine, where she came and helped me for a year and learned an immense amount of material and was very gracious about it. It's hard work being an apprentice. And she was experimenting with enamels, and she was sifting them on. You put a kind of a glue on that doesn't leave any residue, and you have a little cup with a screen in it, and you sift it on, and then you can decide what you want to do. And what she did was, she then did something very unusual. She poured water over it, just sort of dripped water, so that some of the grains joined each other and some washed away. And we were looking at it, and another person said, it looks just like alluvial fans. So she has named her series that and worked on a number of pieces for this show. And unfortunately, she can't be here to be videoed. She's due to stay at work in Oakland, where we all live, or where she and I live. And so that's what her work is here. And I think it's rather fascinating work and very inventive to take something, because enamel has a tradition that's very strict. You often see it in jewelry, which is where some of it started. The earliest pieces we know are from ancient Cyprus. So there she is, taking a very traditional field and just playing with it and coming up with a whole new invention. And that's her series, which she is showing here now.